Past the clouds, over the dark night, she reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red hot light of the North Star.
I got tissues to me, they were so menthol. Menthol. I was like, whoa. Menthol tissues? You know, like those. I have to get some paper towels too. Is that a thing? Did you have paper towels in your house? Yeah, she did have one.
She opened the earth, working with blood soaked. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife.
My left place didn't have any.
Challenged the
And it didn't have washcloth.
pulled from the bodies of slaves, made in laws, prisons and courts.
They don't use washcloth.
Yeah.
I think it was
Like in shower and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like,
I'm like, where is? I reached out to the people who had the penthouse, and the lady is coming from Paris.
Screaming
She's actually there right now.
flames and agony,
So I wanted to wait until after she leaves, and then I'll.
dragging and ripping apart
So she's gonna come off.
possible tender
So-
moments of time. Shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife.
I see that.
Oh boy. Greetings and welcome back as always. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave a speech to top generals and admirals, flag officers, that was allegedly supposed to serve as a rallying cry for military expansionism. But it didn't land that way at all with a lot of the folks that were in the room. Why not? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historic context in which most of these events occur. On today's episode, the issue before us is the Hegseth-Trump bloviating fiasco. Why? And what signals does it send? My guest is a teacher, a writer, author, activist, analyst, phenomenal analyst, and a really nice guy. KJ Noh, as always, my brother, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
So let's start with, what in the world was this thing supposed to do? Hegseth invites over 600 flag officers to Marine Base Quantico, and people from all over the globe, and not only the flag officers, but their staffs as well. What was this thing supposed to be?
Well, it was extraordinary because I think even in the annals of the military, it's very rare to gather so many generals in one place at one time. We know that it was done in Berlin by Adolf Hitler, I think 1934, 1935. And then it was also done by Saddam Hussein in 1979, just before the Ba'athist purge. So I think people were very, very anxious, and they just couldn't understand why you would ask all the flag officers, all the leading commanders to congregate in one place at one time for a speech that normally would be done over secure channels through the internet or through even, possibly an email. And what it turned out to be, I mean, many people are characterizing it as a kind of bombastic anti-woke crusade. And many people are incensed about it. They're incensed or they're poo-pooing it. They find it ridiculous. But I found it to be extraordinarily frightening. And the way that I hear it is I see it as a kind of a prelude, or even, it's a theological term, but a prolegomenon to war, a prequel for World War. And I think that what the key message of this was that, the U.S. Has to get ready for war. It has to be ready for peer competition. It has to be ready to, kick some rear and to break the rules if necessary in kicking the rear. And you have to buck up. You have to, get ready. You have to tighten things up. So, stop with the hot yoga, shave your beards, do your PT, and get ready to fight, because this is what you're supposed to do. And just from a personal standpoint, for me, I was thinking, what does this remind me of? And I said, wow, this is like Travis Bickle's monologue in Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. If you recall that movie, it's about...
Well, wait a minute. Let's see. We might quickly be able to pull a bit of that up. Can we get that? I think we're working on it.
Yeah. So while we're waiting,
Go ahead.
While we're waiting, we know that, this is an old movie from the 70s. Travis Bickle is a Vietnam War veteran who is going into a spiral for a bunch of reasons. And he is preparing to unleash tremendous violence. And he, decides that he's going to work out and get ready and get really, really tough. And he says that, he's going to get organized. But that he's going to make sure that, every muscle of his body, is ready for warfare. Every muscle must be tight. I'll do, 50 push-ups every morning, 50 pull-ups. I'll be totally organized. Every muscle will be tight. And then he also, from time to time goes on these rants where he essentially talks or, complains about, the kind of diversity that he finds intolerable. So, people who have different lifestyles, people who are gay, who are, different from him. He says that, someday a real rain will come and wash all the scum off the streets, which, this is the, task he gives himself. So it's that, combination of extraordinary intolerance combined with a maniacal discipline and vision for imposing his will on the world through violence. So it's a frightening movie but a brilliant one. And as I was watching the Secretary of War speak, I thought, my goodness, it sounds like he's auditioning for the role of Travis Bickle.
I'm glad you made that comparison. I had very similar thoughts, and I'm also glad that you highlighted the fact that in the film, Travis Bickle is spiraling downward, because if you look at where Hegseth was, say, in the beginning of his appointment to where he is now, it seems as though the jingoism is getting more intense. The saber rattling is getting more intense. We have, we've heard him talk about not caring about the Geneva Convention, not caring about international law, and all of those things are incredibly, incredibly concerning statements. And it's the unnecessary bloviating, and I don't know another word to use other than bloviating, that we're being exposed to. KJ.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, certainly we see the intense jingoism, the intense macho posturing, and the extraordinary, divisiveness of the messaging, the intolerance, which again, is classical taxi driver Travis Bickle. But also, as you point out, he didn't actually use the words ignore the Geneva Convention, although we know that the United States has essentially ignored it since the last time John Yoo said that it was quaint. So, but he talked about moving fast and breaking things, and that you were not expected to adhere to the conventions of polite society. And so tremendous posturing, tremendous bravado, and also tremendous license that is being given out. The notion is that we do what we want. And of course, we know that the United States has done what it wants. It does what it wants, and the others suffer what they must. But to put that out in such a naked fashion, not even the fig leaf of hypocrisy to cover up, these crimes, these war crimes, that the kind of brazenness, I think, is really astonishing for most people.
So when you look at this, he says, for example, from this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War, which by the fact it's not, because only Congress can change the name, and as far as I know, they haven't done that, is this: war fighting, preparing for war and preparing to win, unrelenting and uncompromising in that pursuit, not because we want war. No one here wants war, but it's because we love peace. We love peace for our fellow citizens. They deserve peace, and they rightfully expect us to deliver. This, to me, particularly when you understand his background and when you understand Trump's background, these are the chicken hawks that are screaming the loudest.
Unfortunately, I think you're right on that. I mean, certainly, Secretary Hegseth has, spoken about being a crusader, and in particular being a crusader against China, going on the warpath. He said just recently in this most recent speech, we unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. That doesn't sound like somebody who wants peace. That sounds like somebody who really, really revels in war and the violence of war.
And I got my crazies confused. It wasn't Hegseth, it was J.D. Vance.
Understandable.
In talking about ignoring international law, it was J.D. Vance that said it. It wasn't Hegseth, but I hope that most of you all watching this could understand why I could confuse the idiots.
Well, I mean, he says right there, no more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. We untie the hands. We don't fight with stupid rules of engagement, essentially saying anything goes. So perfectly understandable.
Now, I found this interesting because as the commander-in-chief has been screaming to anyone who will listen that he wants and deserves a Nobel Prize for peace, his Secretary of Defense says, Our number one job, of course, is to be strong so we can prevent war in the first place. Then it's called peace through strength. And as history teaches us, the only people who actually deserve peace are those who are willing to wage war to defend it. That's why pacifism is so naive and dangerous. It ignores human nature and it ignores human history. KJ, that's dangerous.
That's very dangerous. Those assumptions are very dangerous. First, I believe that people deserve peace, period. They deserve peace. They deserve peaceful lives, regardless of how aggressive or not aggressive they are. And secondly, when he asserts that that is human nature, well, I mean, the fossil record shows that for hundreds of thousands of years, hominids and humans, essentially had, for the most part, a non-violent society. You did not see intra-species violence. The fossil record does not show significant intra-species violence. So it's not in our DNA, although it is in recent culture and history, certainly related to, the empire and colonial violence. That is what he's referring to. But to generalize that to the rest of human society and human development, I think is ignorant and wrong. But it's understandable because, once again, he's justifying the unleashing of, unlimited violence, not only on adversaries, but also he threw out kind of as a, almost a throwaway statement that the U.S. military would train on our own cities, that they would train in this kind of violence in our own cities and then export it. But, it's something essentially that is going to be applied across the board, both against domestic enemies and against foreign enemies. These are frightening words, and I think they're compounded by the fact that everything else that we see signals, in particular, Secretary Hegze's speech at the Shangri-La summit signals they're looking to escalate to war, in particular against China. He actually mentions China in this speech. He says, we'll get to that later, but he mentions China. And then his entire Shangri-La speech a few months ago was nothing but the bashing of China and the preparing for war against China. It was a few sentences short of an outright declaration of war against China. So I think this is very, very dangerous and frightening. And it's also delusionary because, he thinks that the United States is flabby and soft because it hasn't done enough PT and because it has women and that does hot yoga. That's not the reason. For 2 decades, the U.S. doctrine of war was co-in or counterinsurgency. That is to say, it was fighting sheep herders, with primitive weapons and launching, drone attacks and complex, using the entire, complexity of joint arms controlled warfare against essentially pastoral sheep herders. That is a war that you should have won, but you didn't. So there's some deep reflection that needs to be done if you believe that these are the kinds of things that you should be doing against innocent civilians or, countries that are invaded, that are defending themselves. But the other thing which is deeply delusional is that the United States has attrited and deindustrialized itself. The industrial capacity for a period of 50 years has been essentially gutted. It's been self-gutting. And this is the function of monopoly capitalism. As companies get bigger and bigger, like, for example, Amazon, they become monopolies. And as they become monopolies, they simply decide that they don't have to produce things. They can just coerce people and demand money. They can just twist arms and force rents. This is a kind of transition from industrial productive capitalism into financial capitalism. And so, for example, if you're trying to order a burrito, you'll get DoorDash saying, do you want to pay that in 4 easy installments? It's that financialization of everything. They're going to take a chunk of your money every time you do anything. And so when you do that, what happens is your workers starve while your lawyers and your accountants get fat. And the vast majority of the working class suffers, and the ruling elite just become rich beyond belief. But at the same time, what happens is the entire industry and the economy becomes inshittified, pardon my French, and nothing works. Nothing works anymore. And when you get to that stage, you can't even produce the weapons and the resources necessary to go to war, which is one of the things that we're seeing. The reason why the US had to pull back from its support of Israel against Iran, or it's having trouble supplying, munitions to the Russia-Ukraine theater. All of these things have to do with the attrition and the deindustrialization of US industrial capacity. So here's the problem. Engineers and workers, they solve problems. Lawyers invent problems, and then they tell stories how to solve them. And the United States is a country that is led by lawyers who are telling stories to themselves, and they think that they can go to war at will and browbeat and bully the entire planet. And it's not going to work unless they're planning to use nuclear weapons, which everything suggests that they are.
Unless they're planning to use nuclear weapons. Stromboli, the Pope of Hopes, thank you for that $10 super sticker. I found it concerning when the idiot alluded to any war we choose, paraphrased. Yes, that is incredibly concerning. And to elaborate a little bit, KJ, on a point you were making, first of all, this whole idea of peace through strength. The reason why that doesn't make sense anymore is because we're now in an environment, in a real world of peer competitors. And so there's this country, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called Russia. There's another country which you might have heard of it, China, and they're truly peer competitors. They have been preparing for this Hegseth mania, stockpiling weapons that will support their strategies for defense. Hence, when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, Russia was preparing for a war of attrition, an artillery-based war of attrition. And what are they fighting? An artillery-based war of attrition. What are they winning? An artillery-based war of attrition. And the United States has run out of artillery. So who in the world is Hegseth talking to other than himself? Because even the audience knows, and they know better than he does. Pete, you're writing a check. You're letting your mouth write a check that your army can't cash.
Yes. Here's the thing. When you reach a kind of financialized stage of the economy, people think that you can just print money. They think you can just print money at will. And that is true up to a certain point, and then you have all kinds of negative effects. But the same mindset pervades industry itself. They think you can print missiles. Well, you actually cannot. It's an incredibly complex procedure. Now, the Pentagon has just made the demand that the US is going to increase the amount of missiles by 4 times, fourfold. Mm-hmm. So it's going to, create, 300% more missiles. But that is not going to happen because, as I said before, we have lost industrial capacity. We have de-skilled. We have enshittified basically everything. We don't have the supply chains. Most of our supply chains come from China. So we would be, if we went to war against China, we'd be attacking our own supply chain. Plus, China has a near monopoly on rare earth metals that are used in all the electronic devices, in particular the navigation systems that power these missiles. And it certainly has a total monopoly on the 7 lanthanides that are essential for for certain types of magnets. And so the U.S. you're absolutely right. The U.S. doesn't understand what it's getting into and what it's trying to do. I've referred to this many times as the grizzly bear fallacy. It's the 6% of sentient adults in the United States, both men and women, who believe that they can defeat a grizzly bear with their bare hands. This is the grizzly bear fallacy done at institutional level, which is an act of complete and total madness, as you've pointed out, and as we've seen over and over again. The US does not have the capacity to fight an industrial war against an industrial power, which is a peer competitor, which is engaging in a war of attrition. When the first US volunteers started to fight in Ukraine, they ran away immediately because this was something that they had never seen before. When they were fighting in Afghanistan, they would call in a strike on the goat herders, and that was the end of the story. They would shoot up the wedding party, end of story. It was just shooting fish in a barrel. And then when they went and started fighting with the Russians along the Ukraine border, they realized that they were actually the fish that were being shot up in a barrel. And they dropped their weapons and ran away as fast as they could, because they understood for the first time that this is what it looks like to have combat against a peer competitor, a near peer competitor, who is capable of the same electronic warfare, the same jamming, the same surveillance, the same kill chain processes that the US had accustomed itself to doing. So yes, it is not going to be a cakewalk. The US thought that Iraq would be a cakewalk. Turned out not to be the case. The US thought that Vietnam, would buckle. It didn't happen. The US thought that Korea, that the North Koreans and the Chinese would give up. It didn't happen. The US has a string of losing wars, and yet Pete Hegseth thinks that if he gets his generals to lose weight, stop doing hot yoga, shave their beards, and do more PT, that then they're going to have this warfighting capacity. That's not how it works, with or without AI. The only thing that will, balance the odds is nuclear warfare. And I fear, and I have good reason to believe this, is that the US is preparing nuclear war against the rest of the world.
The U.S. is preparing nuclear war against the world. KJ, I have to push back a little bit, because, man, everybody knows that if you just punch a grizzly bear in his nose, that's how you defeat a grizzly bear, just like a shark. KJ, I thought you knew that. Kevin Baptiste, thank you for that $5 super sticker. KJ, do you also feel that some of the course of this meeting was in opposition to the Chinese military parade, a show of strength, so to speak? And again, just punch a grizzly bear in his nose, KJ. That's all you got to do.
Yes, I'll do that later today.
Okay. Okay, please do.
Yes. Was this in opposition to the Chinese military parade? It's possible. I don't know the inner workings, the inner calculations of the Secretary of War, but it's possible. I mean, I think it's important to highlight that the Chinese military parade was a dual. It was sending two messages. One is that we are proud of our military that has suffered so long, but has overcome extraordinary odds, and it defeated the Japanese fascists. With 35 million of our compatriots were killed, but still we came out ahead. We defeated them, and we are never going to allow ourselves to be humiliated, murdered, genocided the way that the Japanese did. We have our own power and strength. We have stood up. So that was one message. And then the other message of the parade was, we seek peace and coexistence. And, they released 80,000 doves. They walked down the street of the long peace towards the gate of heavenly peace. They did everything also humanly possible to indicate that we are strong, but we also seek coexistence and good relations with all of the world, including the United States. And they have praised on many occasions their, the US's support during the war against fascism. So there's a dual message of that parade. Was this a direct response to that? It's hard to say. It's possible. But if it was, I don't think it got the message across the way that they thought it did. I think it sent really the opposite message, which is that the US military is being led by somebody who just doesn't have any understanding of the world, and who is willing to take extraordinary risks, and is threatening and endangering the rest of the planet. So I certainly don't think that it was a good response if that was what it was intended to do.
Daniel Ashcroft says, seems more likely like the PRC is all talk than the U.S. I think, KJ, you've heard me make this statement a number of times, that people are confusing restraint with weakness. And I think that might be part of what's happening here with Daniel Ashcroft. Seems more likely like the PRC is all talk than the U.S. Well, the data and the reports that I've been reading for a couple of years show us that, first of all, the advancements that China has been able to make in military technology greatly outpace what the hypersonic technology, for example, hypersonic cruise missiles, for example. That's just one example in terms of where they are relative to superiority in technology. But again, I wonder if Daniel Ashcroft is misreading restraint with fear.
I think you could be right. I mean, Mr. Ashcroft probably doesn't understand Chinese culture very much. If you've ever interviewed a Chinese person, you ask him, tell me about your accomplishments, and they'll say, oh, I haven't done very much. And then later you look at the resume, and they've, received, 3, patents and 5, engineering awards, and, they're, the top, graduate of their school. So they will actually undersell themselves. They will actually speak softly. That's part of how they do. So it's not all talk, but rather it's very little talk and a lot of action. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, and a lot of preparations. And as you pointed out, of course, hypersonic missiles, but all kinds of ballistic missiles. We know they're developing rail guns. They've developed, their own aircraft carriers. They're,
marine technology.
Yes, autonomous warfare, robots. It's just incredible stuff that is happening. And I've said this before, China is a country which is led by engineers and scientists. All the top leadership are engineers and scientists. The US is led by lawyers and, failed business people. So if technology is a race, if this is a technological race, I put my money on the team that has the engineers and not the lawyers. So, but Mr. Ashcroft, is I would just invite him to look a little bit more, do a little bit more research, and understand what Chinese culture is like, in that it actually tends to understate things and over deliver. And the other piece is that from a concrete, scientific, objective standpoint, China is ahead in 59 out of 64 critical technologies, according to the Australian think tank ASPE. So I think it's very foolish to underestimate your adversary if you are escalating to war. Certainly thinking that, Mike Tyson is a young kid who can be bullied and have his glasses broken and his lunch stolen, which actually did happen, is a mistake, because by the time Tyson was 12 or 13, he was beating professional adults. and just people hadn't, registered that there had been a change.
People hadn't registered that there had been a change. Carol Asbaram, thank you for that $10 super sticker. And Carol would like to know what she should read. What are some of the things you're reading right now, KJ?
Oh, I read everything and
Obviously.
anything. I tend to read the stuff out of the think tanks, the kind of deep state elite think tanks a lot, because they tend to telegraph what they're going to do. So, for example, I read Foreign Affairs. This is the foreign policy journal of the Council of Foreign Relations. These are the people, the most powerful people in the U.S., on the planet. They decide who gets elected, who gets power, what happens around the world. I read other think tanks, CSIS, CNAS, etc., the Atlantic Council. I read them, and I read them carefully, and then I try to decipher what they're saying. Some of it is signaling, and you have to unpack the signaling. And some of it is just kind of naked ambition that they're just putting out there. Foreign Affairs, for example, has this article where they say, look, if we're going to go to war, and we should go to war with China, but if we're going to go to war with China, we need to prepare bombs too. And they say it in such a casual way. We need to thin out their troops with nuclear bombs. There's no debate around this. There's no questioning, is this a good idea? Is there an escalation risk here? Is this really a thing? Do you think that they might actually do the same thing to us? No, they just say, we need to have a plan that includes thinning out their troops with nuclear bombs. If that isn't insanity, I don't know what is, but there's such a casual acceptance of the unthinkable and the insane among the ruling class right now that it kind of takes my breath every time, I think about it.
Billy Willis writes, KJ, most, if not all, advanced military technology was developed in the U.S., but the leadership is awful. Well, Billy, I'd ask you to check the F-16, which at one point was one of the United States' leading fighter jets, whose engine hangs so low it can only take off on pristine runways because the engine sucks up all the debris on the ground and requires incredible downtime due to maintenance. Or you might, if you're thinking about this, what do you call it? Advanced military technology like the F-35 called the flying piano, that you can't fly in storms, you can't fly in the rain. So hopefully all the wars that Hegseth wants to start will start at 7 a.m., end at 5, only on sunny days. KJ Noh.
Yeah, the individual is not wrong. The U.S. has an incredible industrial technological machine, and for many, many decades, it was at the cutting edge of that development. And I think we can even make a more general statement, is that most of the machinery that has been developed in the Western world was originally developed for war. It was war machinery, and then it was turned into machinery for entertainment and distraction. And then finally, decades, if not centuries later, it's finally turned into machines of useful production. So the early machines such as the crane, the lever, the pulley, these were all war machines.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were used as entertainment. They were used as theatrical devices, cranes in the theater space. And then decades later, because when you stopped having a slave society where you actually needed mechanical efficiency, then they started to use it in production. So the gentleman is correct. The West has always been advanced in the development of technology because its technological development has been around martial ends. The machinery has always been around war. That said, in the past 50 years, we see once again, the rapid deindustrialization of the economy. Essentially, nothing works anymore. The machinery, the systems, the software, and nothing works anymore. Just a trivial example. The internet has been down where I live for months. I've been trying to get them to get it to work. They can't fix it. I asked them, what's going on? The internet is designed to be resilient. It was designed to deal with war, so that if one node was taken out, you would still have other nodes through which the packets, the messages could be transmitted through. What's going on? And the customer service agent on the other side sheepishly admitted to me that there are 35 nodes that are down. 35 nodes. How is that possible? Why aren't they just doing basic upkeep and maintenance? The problem that you see with the streets and the bridges and the lights and the parking meters, we see that all the way through and through the entire infrastructure, including the military infrastructure. And that's why you have, on the one hand, contractors, who will charge you $100,000 for a small dime bag of bushings, essentially essentially expensive washers. These are washers, bushings. They
Right.
charge $100,000 for a dime bag of that. So you can see that they're making out like thieves. And on the other hand, the systems don't work, even at those exorbitant prices. As you pointed out, the F-35, the only thing that we know really seems to work on the F-35 seems to be the $250,000 ejector seat. Using it all the time.
And to that point, and then I want to move on to this foreign affairs article. This just popped in my head. Ansar Allah ran a United States carrier group out of the Red Sea. Folks, the poorest, what is considered to be, by many reports, the poorest country in the world ran an American fighter group out of the Red Sea, and they haven't been back. You all that think that the United States military prowess is all that, you need to stop reading your own press clippings, because the world has changed, dramatically changed. KJ, am I off?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, I think the first rule is you do not get high
on your own supply.
There you go. Absolutely. And unfortunately, that seems to be happening. I think a lot of people are being taken in by the indoctrination. And, to be honest, to give it its credit, the U.S. is extraordinary. The U.S.'s superpower is its capacity to propagandize, to market, to do PR, to advertise. And it's extraordinarily skilled at selling a story that people buy and that they start to believe. And even the ones who manufacture the story believe it themselves. So yes, the capacity of the empire to mystify and to, pardon my French, mindfuck you is extraordinary. But that still means that we as individuals, as thinking, critical, rational, caring human beings, have to work harder not to be deceived, not to be taken in. Even as William Casey said, we'll know our project is complete when everything the US population believes is a lie. We're right at that cusp where everything the American population is fed and almost believes is a lie. So we have to make sure that, we exercise a kind of mental discipline, almost a kind of mental jujitsu, martial art, where we're not taken in by those lies, propaganda, indoctrination. Because if we don't, we are being marched to war. The manufacturing of consent is being built for war. We see potentially war already. We see war in the Ukraine against Russia. We see war looming in Iran. We see a genocide happening in Palestine, but we see that the tankers, the refueling tankers are moving into Qatar in order to what looks like another preparation for a strike against Iran. We see the US preparing for war against Venezuela, and it's already, killed civilians as a provocation. And then we see this constant escalation, this massive escalation for war with China. So I think we have to be very, very careful, and each and every person has to really turn their bullshit detectors up to 13, because if we don't, we are done for.
And to the point about China, Foreign Affairs has a piece, The Pentagon's Missing China Strategy. Washington still lacks a credible military plan for deterring Beijing. And you had some issues with this story,
which is the understatement of the year. I would say the first thing is they're talking about quote unquote deterring China, but it has nothing to do with deterrence. When they use the word deterrence, they mean provoke China. When they say security, they really mean hegemony. When they say defense, they mean offense. And when they say deter, they mean provoke. But this article is saying that the United States does not have a war plan against China, which is absolute nonsense, because the guy who wrote the article is from CSIS, which has spent 15 years preparing for war against China, both economic and kinetic. So it's a very, very odd article. But he talks about the offsets. Yes, this is part of US military doctrine. The US has the third offset against China, which is the notion that if we distribute our forces, spread a wall of missiles across the first island chain surrounding China with so many missiles and attack platforms that it doesn't know what to do with, we will defeat them. And also, we know that the US has a pre-prepared plan of war for China. It's called Air-Sea Battle. It was developed in 2016, commissioned by Andrew Marshall at the Department of Defense. It is 16 years old, and it has gone through 9 revisions. When it first came out, people were in an uproar. They said, who authorized war with China? But it was too late. It was already out there. And Air-Sea Battle, the title is unusual, but there's a reason for it. It's called Air-Sea Battle because it was modeled on air-land battle, which was the doctrine of war against the Soviet Union. Air-land battle, most people haven't heard it in those terms, but they know it in its colloquial form, which is shock and awe. In other words, the war doctrine that the US used against Iraq 1 and 2, that was air-land battle. You saw it. And it involves massive preemptive decapitation strikes deep into the rear, this incredibly aggressive set of preemptive attacks. That is what air-land battle is. And it is actually developed from Israeli war doctrine, from the Yom Kippur War. Prior to that, the US did not have a practice of striking the rear. For example, during the Korean War, it never bombed Beijing. During the Vietnam War, it never attacked Hanoi. There was a sanitary cordon for 30 kilometers outside of Hanoi. So the U.S. does not. So the U.S. generally does not do decapitation attacks on the rear. Didn't do that in those wars. But after the Yom Kippur War, the U.S. adopted Israeli war doctrine, and that became air-land battle, which we know as shock and awe. And then they developed a shock and awe battle plan for China, which is called Air-Sea Battle. And they tested it in 2011 on Libya, just to see the proof of concept. They showed that it worked. And they revised this plan 9 times, and it's being consistently, escalated and improved, although, we don't know the specific details of it. So for this guy, Seth G. Jones at CSIS to say that we don't have a plan of war against China is just nonsense. He's, his entire organization and everybody in the deep state has been working on this for at least 16 years. But what is extraordinarily ominous about this article is not the subterfuge and the feigned innocence, but what he recommends. And he says that the United States needs to prepare strategic bombers that can be based beyond the range of Chinese ballistic missiles, and they can carry substantial conventional and nuclear bombs, substantial nuclear bombs to thin Chinese forces. In other words, he's saying, let's bring on nuclear Armageddon against the Chinese. And he doesn't understand that the enemy has a move. They have a vote in this. They have a nuclear vote too. That is what's so extraordinarily dangerous, misguided, and I would say insane about the thinking of the ruling elite right now.
My memory is a bit vague on this, but I seem to recall when Nancy Pelosi was all this talk when she was getting ready to go into Taiwan, and there was all this discussion, and that was around the same time that the United States was wargaming conflicts with China in the region, and they did this 25 times and lost 25 times. So we can't even win it on a computer, let alone win it in the field. But I don't know how many folks that are on this thread, espousing the virtues of the U.S. military. And I'll repeat it. The U.S. wargamed a conflict with China over Taiwan, set up its own parameters of conflict, and folks went 0-25. Where all of this talk about, the United States this, the United States that, and whoever it was, when I posted the question, when was the last time the United States won a conflict, and somebody said the Gulf War. Really? You all want to claim that one as a victory? KJ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the last war, if you can call it that, was really Grenada or
the
Panama.
Military
Panama.
of Grenada. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
they're a military power. Yeah.
Hyperpower. So, yeah.
Hyperist of powers.
Absolutely. I mean, the U.S. does not have a good track record in winning wars. I mean, just think about post-World War II, 1945. Of course, the war was won by the Soviet Union. The USSR tore the guts out of the Nazis, and then the U.S. came in from behind and claimed the victory for itself. But let's think about 1950, when the Korean and the Chinese military went to war against the United States. This was, the first real direct conflict of the post-World War II era. And the U.S., again, had this incredible hubris. They said the Chinese couldn't fight. Of course, the Chinese had been fighting, for 2.5 decades, first amongst themselves, and then for 15 years against the Japanese. 35 million Chinese had died. The Japanese had been genocidal in China. Just one city alone in Nanjing, they slaughtered 300,000 people in 6 weeks. So, the Americans thought that, the Chinese have no will to fight, no capacity to fight. And besides, they don't have the technology, the industrial capacity. They cannot beat us. There are a bunch of people in pajamas who can do hit and run, but they cannot fight us toe to toe. And what they didn't realize was that they said, we'll be back by Thanksgiving. The war broke out June 25th. They said, we'll be back by Thanksgiving. Well, the Chinese hit. And then they vanished and disappeared. And the U.S. thought, that was it? They're not even supposed to be here. How could they have crossed the border, and hit us? But maybe it was just, a lucky strike. And so the U.S. continued moving towards the Chinese border between Korea and China. And the Chinese hit again. And they hit the 8th Army so hard. It is the longest and most humiliating retreat in the history of U.S. military history. The 8th Army, was, riding its bicycle backwards for the longest retreat in the history of the 8th Army, the history of the U.S. Army, and probably one of the longest retreats in the history of warfare itself. And so I think that, once again, let's be very, very careful about the grizzly bear fallacy. The enemy always has a vote, but it's especially foolish to think that a country that has fought and is fighting for dignity and its survival and for justice is not going to fight hard. Volition counts as much as any other factor in war. And the U.S., thinks that it can just kind of pick up these small countries, toss them against the wall. It never turns out that way. That grizzly bear has a say. It has a vote in the course of the interaction. So I think it's very, very important for us to understand that. I'll just give you one more example. There is a journal called the Small Wars Journal. Mm-hmm. And it's actually an insider journal written by insiders for policy insiders. And it kind of connects the dots between grand strategy that you see in the major deep state think tanks and the kind of operational details. And so they had an article in Small Wars Journal, it's very influential. And they said, essentially, when China goes to war, when we go to war with China over Taiwan, it will be like Gallipoli. That is the way that the Australian and New Zealanders were wiped out on the beaches of Gallipoli. And they said, this is exactly what is awaiting China. What they don't understand, and it just boggles my mind that they don't understand this, is that Gallipoli was a peninsula. And so it was very easy for the Turkish to reinforce their troops and then essentially turn the entire beach into a kill zone. Taiwan is an island. Mm-hmm. Therefore, there will be no reinforcements. Nothing like that will happen. And the better analogy, and if they were smart, they would think about that. The better analogy for Taiwan Island, if they trigger a war, and if the war stays conventional, is Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam.
There you go.
The French thought that they could create essentially a kill box for the People's Army of Vietnam. They would, have powerful weapons, and they would create what they called an hérisson strategy, a hedgehog strategy, whereby the People's Army of Vietnam would be lured into a trap where they would be demolished by French artillery and air power. That never happened. Instead, what happened was, once again, the French had the most humiliating defeat in the history of the 20th century. 12,000 the artillery officer committed suicide. 12,000 surrendered. 10,000 were casualties, and it essentially brought down the French Fourth Republic. So I think this is what they don't understand. The enemy has a say. The adversary, has considerable force and power and volition, and it is very, very foolish to underestimate and to denigrate your adversary as you escalate to war without real capacity. It's that it's a kind of overestimation of oneself, which is deeply, deeply fatal and deadly even. And we see this over and over again, certainly among, the ruling imperial elite, the chicken hawks. They overjudge their capacities and underestimate those of their adversaries.
And overestimate themselves and underestimate their adversaries. You're absolutely right. And Billy Willis writes in my comment about Iraq, that was me, Dr. Leon, and I hope you're not saying that Iraq won the war. I didn't say that. What I said was the United States didn't win. I didn't say Iraq won. I said the United States didn't win. And some, KJ, help me out here, might argue that the war isn't over, which is why I'm saying we didn't win. Some will tell you that we're still fighting it. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, the U.S. is good at, once again, air-land battle, this kind of maneuver, blitzkrieg strike. So initially, they, disarmed it, decapitated. And then the real war happened. And that was the slow, long, attritional war. And the U.S. has not won that. It has not accomplished its plans. Certainly what happened in Afghanistan, the U.S. simply turned tail and ran out. And Iraq, it is still ongoing, but certainly the U.S. is nowhere close to achieving its goals, which it believed that it would essentially liberate the country. It would be greeted with roses and chocolates and flowers, and that they would build a reliable vassal state that was a flourishing democratic country. None of that has happened. None of that has happened. Essentially, what they've done is they've created an ally of Iran, and they've undermined their own, geostrategic plans in the region. So no, the U.S. has not accomplished any of its goals except its initial goal, which was to destroy the state. That they're very good at. They're good at destroying things, but have they built anything? Have they accomplished, quote unquote, the peace? Have they accomplished a victory? Not at all.
They created the vacuum. And now what do you do within the vacuum you've created? And hence the adage, you have the watches, but we have the time. So, Billy, I'm not going to belabor that point. I just think, man, you the game ain't over. So how can you say the U.S. won? They're still playing the game. Pauline Douglas, thank you very much for that $20 super sticker. I think I think Pauline might be new. And Kevin Baptist, thank you again for that $10. And your comment, thank you for an always peerless analysis, KJ. Hopefully, some of the delusion in the chat will throw off pride in the face of the facts you have presented today. And with that, let me say, KJ, as always, my brother, thank you. Greatly, greatly appreciate your time today. If you have any parting thoughts, we'd love to hear them. And but again, man, you bring it every time you're on, and I greatly appreciate it when you join me.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to join you and your audience every time, Wilmer. And my final thoughts is, let's do away with the grizzly bear fallacy. It is deadly and dangerous for us. Let's do away with the military Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay, we have to get rid of that. We cannot overestimate ourselves. And then for everybody who's listening to this show, you already know this, but I'll say it because I think it bears repeating. The Pentagon sees your mind as a theater of war. They literally consider mental space, your mind, as a theater of contestation. And they believe that their job is to occupy, control it. This is all the work in information warfare, in psyops, in indoctrination, in propaganda. They believe that they have to win, the battle, the terrain, the mental terrain, before they can go on to the other terrains of, space and land and sea, etc. So in a sense, we have both a great responsibility and a great opportunity that we can actually prevent war, or at least throw, a spanner into the works, if we keep our minds from being propagandized and indoctrinated, and in particular, in being indoctrinated into hating the enemy that they want you to attack, and thus manufacturing consent for war. This is the first line of defense. It's also the most important line of defense. And I believe that each and every one has a duty to exercise mental self-defense. If we can do that, and then we get together and we share our understandings and we derive truth from facts and we build solidarity together, we actually have a chance of stopping the war machine. And once again, I want to emphasize that if the US is planning for war, and if it is planning for nuclear war, we don't get a second chance to stop that. So we have to stop it now. So that's all I have to say.
You've said a lot, as always. KJ Noh, greatly appreciate it. Look forward to having you back. Cyril Mark Hall, $5 super sticker. Thank you very much for that. Greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. Folks, we're about 170 away from 10,000, and we really need a push. Ping, you are more than welcome. Really, really a push Billy Willis, you still want to know who I rooted for in the Ryder Cup? Come on, man. This is serious business we're engaged in here. I don't have time for foolishness and childish questions. With that, and by the way, while it was on, I was playing golf. They call me long ball. I was rooting for myself. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon, also known as Long Ball. Stay tuned. Episode tomorrow. Ajamu Baraka is going to join us. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. You'll find all the links are below in the show description. And remember, folks, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Ajamu Baraka joins us. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.